Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. Today, in episode 67, we sit down with Reverend Roger Joslin, a man whose life's journey reads like a rich tapestry of experiences and insights, from his roots in rural Texas, where the values of community and hard work were ingrained in him, to the vibrant, tumultuous summer of love in 1969 California. Reverend Joslin's story is one of constant exploration and discovery. We'll talk about his formative years at the University of Texas, Austin, and his quest across America seeking purpose and understanding. His shared tales from his days as a furniture maker, a craft that not only sustained him but also grounded him before answering a higher calling. Reverend Joslin then takes us to Bentonville, Arkansas, where he started a church and engaged with the local community, including Walmart, to advocate for better wages and working conditions. His journey eventually led him to the North Fork, where he now serves at the Church of the Redeemer in Mattituck and Holy Trinity Church in Greenport. In this conversation, we delve into the moments that shaped him, the challenges he faced, and the joys he found along the way. It's a story of faith, resilience, and the enduring quest for a meaningful life. Join us as we uncover the remarkable life of Reverend Roger Joslin. So I hope you enjoy episode 67. This episode was recorded June 5th, 2024. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today.
I'm delighted to be here, Chris.
Thank you. And to start off, can you give me a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised?
I'm a native Texan, and I was raised out in the country, a small town in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, south of there.
And in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go on both of your parents' side?
I did a little research a few years ago, and to my great surprise, found that on both sides of my family, almost everyone came from southeastern England, County Kent in particular.
Wow.
I thought I was a mixture of Irish and German. Completely wrong. It's all English.
Wow. And that was early on in terms of the time frame.
Many generations back. Yeah, my family have, let's see, probably 4 or 5 generations have been Texans. They immigrated from England to various points in the United States, but then to Tennessee and then to Texas. Mm-hmm. And so my roots are deep in Texas.
Yes.
It's a funny thing, too, because in this part of the world where your ethnic heritage is a big deal, mm-hmm. in Texas, it's like people really lose touch with that very quickly. And mm-hmm. They're Texans.
Yes.
I think I have somebody from somewhere in the far distance.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I think you do see some more of that connection. Mm-hmm. More so in the Northeast. And I told you I was in Texas for a few years, so right. It's interesting environment. And I was just curious about did you get to meet your grandparents on
I did.
Both sides?
On both sides, yeah.
And do you know what they did for work?
Yeah, my grandfather was a serial entrepreneur. Most of his life was hard, and they were sharecroppers, and he owned a used car lot, and he owned a drive-in movie theater, and he owned a mattress factory, and any number of things. Eventually, he was pretty successful at before the days of rural electrification and selling electrical generating windmills. And that worked really well until they electrified the country. You know, the federal government came in and brought electricity to people who needed it very badly, but he went out of business then. He went in and out of business over and over again. And, a kind of a rough life, really.
And then what about your parents?
My dad was for most of his career was a locomotive engineer for the Santa Fe Railway, and my mom took care of the kids. We had 2 brothers and a younger sister.
And did your dad say what that was like, that experience was like working for the Santa Fe Railway?
Oh, I lived it with him. It was one of my... I would see him get up in the middle of the night, and they'd get a call from the train station saying, "Joslin, we need you to take the 747 out in an hour and a half and go to Gainesville or someplace." And he'd get up in the middle of the night and go drive the trains. One of my fondest childhood memories was when my dad was the engineer on the Santa Fe Chief, which is a storied line between Houston and Chicago. And I got to go with him. And I got on the train in Cleburne, Texas, and he was going to Purcell, Oklahoma. And was sitting in one of the passenger cars, and the conductor came by, punching the tickets, and said, "Are you Joslin's boy?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And I had my little lunch that my mom had made for me, and he said, "Wait here." And in a little while he came back and he said, "Come with me." And we went on followed him up through all the other passenger cars and the Pullmans and on up to the engine, and where my dad was. And he turned around, looked at me, and lifted me up, put me on the engineer's seat, showed me how to pull the horn, and he had to keep his foot on what they call the dead man's brake, dead man's pedal. So because the train comes to an automatic stop if the pedal's released, and pull the throttle back. And at one point I was going 90 miles an hour across the Red River going to Oklahoma, riding a train, and I was about 9 years old, and it was a kick.
That had to have been really a fun experience.
It was a little taste of my dad's life. Yeah.
And would you mind saying how your parents met?
They both lived in the same small town in Texas, around Alvarado, and it was a friend of a friend introduced them, and Dad came over to the house where Mom lived, and she was sitting on the bed eating popcorn, if I recall.
And then, so for you, did you have any brothers or sisters?
2 older brothers, 11 and 13 years older. And so they're really, they were more like uncles than brothers, really. And then I had a younger sister, 2.5 years younger than me.
And did you grow up all your time outside of Dallas for your childhood and middle school, high school?
Out in the country, really, in Johnson County. And an idyllic kind of childhood like few people can enjoy, where I was riding horses and swimming in creeks and fishing and just having a good time in the country. I loved being out there and I relished it.
Was it one of those one light towns, or was there a main street?
This wasn't in a town at all.
It was a really rural country.
It was very rural. Yeah.
Okay.
There were dirt roads connecting the houses and pastures all around and ranches everywhere. We had a pretty small ranch, but I knew all the neighbors, and I could ride my horse through thousands of acres of land and up and down country roads and long railroad tracks, and I stayed on horseback most of the time.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say your schooling experience was?
It was adequate.
Mm-hmm.
The small town, the quality of the teachers were mixed. Some were really good and inspirational, and some not so good. Like I had coaches who were teachers, and so even though I love history, it was poorly taught. And but I also love English literature, and I had good English literature teachers throughout, and had a deep appreciation for that. I was a pretty good student, and it seemed at the time there was a lot of free time during school, like a couple of different study halls, and I could do my homework pretty quickly. And I read a lot. They had a pretty decent library, and it seems like that I managed to educate myself much of the way just by reading.
And would you be involved in sports?
Oh, everything. It's a small town. Yeah, yeah, I played.
You'd cross over into multiple different...
Yeah, I played football, basketball, baseball. And in your small town in Texas, if you don't play football, you're nobody. Mm-hmm. And you had to. And I was a skinny little kid, but I had to work really hard to put on some weight and be tough enough to play football. But I managed. And yeah, it's in a little town like that, you do everything.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned some of the activities you did outside of school. And did you have a role model growing up as a child?
Well, that's a good question. That I haven't considered too much. There were a few. There was... I grew up in the church, and in a Baptist church, and there were a number of really upstanding people. My dad was very much a role model for me. Mm-hmm. And there are other men in the church that I admired greatly. Yeah, not so many, really, as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
Later in life, to be sure, but not so much as a young man.
Now, coming out of high school, did you know what you wanted to do for a living?
For a living, no. But I was foolish enough to think that I wanted to continue playing football. And so I attended Baylor, because I'd grown up Baptist, and Baylor was a Baptist school. And
in Waco, Texas.
In Waco, Texas. And I discovered rather quickly that I wasn't big enough, strong enough, mean enough to play college football. And so I played 1 year there and decided, no, this is not for me. But I did discover that I really enjoyed college. I enjoyed college, and I enjoyed the classes, and I had great teachers, and really reveled in having a good education.
And could you give us a time frame when that was?
Well, I'll back it up a little bit. I graduated from high school in 1969, and the day, even though I'd enjoyed school, it was time to get it. I knew I needed to get out of this little town. The day after I graduated from high school, I got on a plane and went to Southern California. And it was kind of a rite of passage in our family. We had relatives in California, and to go to California in the summer was something my brothers did too. Mm-hmm. But this was 1969. And I think technically the Summer of Love was 1968, but it was still the same scene in 1969. And I'm just this small town boy from Texas, and the world opened up big. I discovered the world was not as it seemed, was not as small as I had been accustomed to. And I wound up getting a job. I had some friends, close friend whose dad was a steel worker, and I got a job for the summer as a steel worker. And I worked hard all day long, and my friend Bill and I were both going to play football. He was going to play at TCU, and I was playing at Baylor. And so we would run from the job site to Tex, his dad, was waiting for us at the local 7-Eleven drinking beer, and we'd run to stay in shape, and then we'd bought surfboards. We'd hit the beach, and we'd surf till it got too dark to surf, and then we'd hit the streets and stay out all night and get a couple hours sleep. And Tex would wake us up the next morning and said, "You boys can stay out all night. You can get up early." And we'd go to work again and do it all over and over again all summer long. And then I turned 18 that summer, and we're in the midst of the war in Vietnam. And I hadn't had a political thought in my head up to that time. And so I had to register for the draft. And so I got on a bus. We were living in Oceanside at the time on a beach, and took the bus into San Diego, registered for the draft without really giving it a thought. Climbed on the bus on the way back, and there was a guy sitting behind me who was really only a couple of years older than I was, but he had just returned from Vietnam. And I doubt that he was diagnosed at the time, but now we would say that he had PTSD. And he described to me some of his experiences in Vietnam, and he had been a machine gunner. And he described a day in which there was a funeral procession walking along a hillside off in the distance, and they set up his machine gun and killed every man, woman, and child walking across the hillside. And then he showed me his human ear collection. It may have formed into a necklace. And I realized at that moment that I had been lied to by my church, by my government, by my family, by my country. Things were not as it seemed. It opened my eyes, and I was immediately politicized and began to think about more important issues than football and chasing girls. Mm-hmm. And I just began to pay attention then.
And that was
1969.
In Southern California.
Mm-hmm. And I came back and went to school at Baylor. But I found Baylor also, we called it Bear High, because it still seemed like high school to me. And had a friend that lived in Austin. We went for a weekend. Went to see him one weekend, and I was like, "Oh, I love this place. There's music, there's beautiful women, there's protests in the street. This is a happening place."
Very different from Waco, Texas.
So different than Waco, Texas. And so I transferred to University of Texas.
And at that time, was it that once you went to college, in terms of the draft, you didn't have to?
I had a low number. Yeah, I was not 51 in the lottery, and I would have been called up, but I stayed in school. At one point, I applied for conscientious objector status, but I was wisely convinced by one of my draft counselors that there's no way that the draft board in Johnson County, Texas, would ever grant me conscientious objector status, and that I should stay in school. Mm. And I did. And the war ended about the time I graduated.
And what were you studying at UT Austin?
Psychology.
What attracted you to that area?
Well, I'm interested in human beings, but also you had asked earlier about role models, and I didn't really have them before that, but there was a psychology professor, social psychology professor named Elliot Aronson, who really got my attention. I found a very admirable fellow, found him brilliant and awake, and was intrigued by the study.
Mm-hmm. And what did you end up doing after you finished your bachelor's? I
thought I would go to grad school, but I wasn't really ready. And I did a lot of traveling. Backpacked around Mexico for a long time. Traveled across the United States with a friend in a Volkswagen van, a couple of hippies, going to Canada. I bicycled back from Glacier National Park, right by the Canadian border. Bicycled home from there to Texas, and numerous adventures. Worked as a carpenter along the way, here and there. Just trying to figure out what I was going to do, but just enjoying life, really.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you probably have a lot of there's a lot of experiences within that time frame. But was there any memorable stories that you can remember within that, whether in Mexico or the Volkswagen?
Let's see, which one can I tell in broadcast? Let's see. There was we were in a little town not far from Chihuahua on the coast on the west coast of Mexico, a little town called Topolobampo, and it's a fishing village. And we were there just because my friend Mark I was traveling with would like to fish. But we'd had an incident that had happened in Chihuahua where I had been badly burned on my hands. We had a little Coleman stove that had spilled and spilled fuel on my hands, and went to the local Cruz Roja, the Red Cross, that evening, and they bandaged me up, and then we went in the next morning, and all the bandages had stuck to my skin, and really painful kind of experience. So I was kind of dealing with that, but we went over to Topolobampo and just kind of hanging out on the beaches, and I remember it's at this little bay, and this fishing boat came up, and there were about 7 or 8 fishermen had come in, and they'd come in to just to have their lunch, and they pulled the boat up on the shore, and I was sitting there watching them, and they started preparing a meal, and they had clams. They had dozens and dozens of clams, and they opened up all the clams and put them into this one big bucket, and they chopped up onions and tomatoes and cilantro and mixed it all up, and they had tortillas, and they started passing it around. They saw me, asked me to join them, and so we passed around this communal bucket of clams, and it was perhaps the most delicious meal I've ever eaten in my life. My Spanish is okay, and enough that we could have a nice conversation, and I enjoyed their sharing and the camaraderie and just meeting these fishermen. And then we finished eating all the clams, and in the bottom of the bucket is all the juices. And they handed it to me, and they said, "Bébelo, drink it." Okay. But I did, and it was fantastic. It
was a lot of different flavors.
Lots of flavors, an ample amount of spit, I suspect, after passing it around that much.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of the most beautiful experiences of communion I can ever recall. It's fantastic.
Yeah. No, that's a really nice experience. And now, in terms of...
They weren't all like that. Let's see, I have one more. It's kind of cool. I was at that time, we'd done some sailing also. I was in Baja, and my girlfriend's mother had gotten sick. She had cancer. And I decided it was time for me to go home. We've been traveling for quite a few months, and it's a long way from the tip of Baja. We were at La Paz. No, we were at Cabo San Lucas, which is at the very tip. And Cabo San Lucas is a huge resort now, but then it was just a sleepy little village. And we were hanging out there with the sailors and the fishermen, and I got notice that that I should go home. So I had decided that the best way to get there would be to fly, but I didn't really have any money. And so I hitchhiked up to La Paz, to the airport. And there were private planes there, lots of private planes. They take planes down there to go fishing. So I went up to the private air section of the airport where the private planes were, and there was a guard standing there with his guns, his rifle, and I explained to him what I wanted to do, that I was looking for a ride. I wanted to try to hitch a ride on a plane to the United States. And he listened. I don't think anybody ever asked him that before, but he pointed me in the direction, and I went up to this tower and told them what I wanted to do, and they said, "Oh yeah, there's a guy leaving, shortly." And so I went over to him and explained to him that what was going on, and I needed to get back home. And he said, "Do you have any drugs?" And I said, "No." So he said, "Climb in." And so I climbed in his. It was like about a three-seat Cessna, I think. Mm-hmm. And he flew me to El Paso. And all the drug enforcement people were waiting to meet me when I got there, but I didn't have anything. But I discovered that you could hitchhike right on planes at that time, and did a number of times in different places in the United States and around. If you just ask, like, "Hey, you're right." I don't think you can do that anymore, but yeah, you could then.
And that was in the 70s.
That was it was in the 70s. Yeah.
And this was, you said, a time where you had finished college and just wanting to explore and see.
Out of college, money spent, have no future, pay no rent.
And you said there were a lot of hippies at the time. Was that more or less who you were like hanging out with?
Was I a hippie? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Depends on who you ask. Yeah. Sure.
And then so in terms, I don't want to jump too much, but...
Jump all you want.
How big was the gap between your travel then and then in terms of when you decided you wanted to go to seminary school?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll fill in a little bit.
Sure.
I went back to school, to graduate school, for a while, and lived in England for a few years. Studied there. Studied international politics. My interest in the war in Vietnam led me to an interest in peace research, and I had bold ambitions about making peace for the world, and didn't work out quite as planned.
What school?
The University of Sussex, in Brighton, England. And then I came back to the United States, and I'd gotten married, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do then, and I had acquired some carpentry skills along the way with my dad and working odd jobs here and there. But I decided I really wanted to be a furniture maker, and I liked the simplicity of that. I'd been working on a dissertation for a good while, and I wanted to see the results of my labor, really. At the end of the day, I wanted to be able to say, "Here's what I built," and not just hammer away at a dissertation. But I wound up getting in the architectural woodwork business and ran a business for 20 years, and with varying degrees of success. Yeah, there's a real boom and bust economy in Texas, and sometimes I was doing well, sometimes not so well.
And that was all furniture making?
Furniture, cabinetry, standing and running trim, like we might do a library and do all this kind of woodworking and built-in cases and things like that. Big projects, little projects, all kinds of work.
So you had that for a while?
For about 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I had a call to the priesthood. Do you want to hear about that?
Yes.
Yeah. It's kind of a funny thing. I talk about it quite a lot, and there's a lot of different ways of explaining it. There are very practical reasons. I had acquired some skills along the way that I think prepared me for this kind of work. And I don't pretend that I'm the best preacher, teacher, counselor, administrator there is. I'm just pretty good at a lot of those things. And so it's, I'm pretty good at this work. I'm prepared for it. And but then there's mystical kind of reasons as well. I left the church behind for a long time, and probably because of my experience in the war in Vietnam, because my church hadn't supported that, hadn't supported my opposition to the war. And it didn't make sense to me. The Jesus that I knew about, was a peacemaker. And I took it pretty seriously. So, but I eventually found my way back to the church. I found at the Episcopal Church, we were called on to think. It wasn't just like it's in the Bible, you believe it, or here's what the church fathers taught. It was much more, we pay attention to those things, but also God gave us a brain, and we're meant to use it. And so I found that to be true in the Episcopal Church. It also was drawn to the liturgy. It was beautiful. Art as a pathway to God seemed like a reasonable thing that was not part of my upbringing as a Baptist, where things were more austere. Beautiful people and good-hearted people, but beauty was not, or artfulness wasn't part of what they respected or practiced. So I kind of found my way to the Episcopal Church and discovered it and found a home there, and became very involved in the church. And I began to visit monasteries and go on retreats. I've been a serious practitioner of meditation for a long time, and exploring non-conventional pathways to the divine. And then at one of the, I've always been an adventurer and going hiking and canoeing, and I love the outdoors. That's part of why I love it here in Greenport. And northern New Mexico, the Pecos Wilderness area, is kind of the closest place to Texas to get in mountains and get escape from the heat of the summer. And I'd go there frequently. It became a spiritual homeland of mine. But on the way to the wilderness area, I would always pass by a monastery. One time I decided, no, let's see what this place is about. And I called him up and arranged to stay there. And at the time I ran a lot, still run some, but I ran a lot in those days. And I was running on these trails all around the monastery. They go a combination of logging trails and animal trails and hiking trails that would take you all the way to Colorado if you wanted to. And I ran and ran and ran, and then I began to wonder if I was going to find my way back. And so I took, I decided at every intersection I'd come by where there's a crossroads where I wasn't sure which way to go, that I would place 2 sticks down on the ground to point the way back. And on the way back to the monastery, I discovered that really what had happened is that there was a cross. It was a cross that was showing me the way home. And it's richly emblematic for me. And I ran home in tears. I'd already had this encounter with a mountain lion on the way, where she had just crossed the trail in front of me and looked at me, and we had a moment. And I've had that a lot, actually, where I've had eye-to-eye contact with various animals and birds. And I'd met a monk there named Patrick, Brother Patrick, who I'd gotten to know. And this monastery was Olivetan. It's a branch of Benedictines. The Olivetans wear white instead of brown or black. And Brother Patrick was about 5 feet tall and wide, and he looked like a marshmallow with his white robes on. But we became friends, and at one point he said, "Roger, you ought to be an Anglican priest." He had earlier blamed me because of my Anglican heritage for the work of Henry VIII and burning the monasteries in England in the 16th century, but of my connection there. But that was more lighthearted. And and I told him, people had mentioned that to me before, but I've got kids and I have to work, and there's no way I could go to seminary. And he wasn't convinced. And then one evening, he knocked on the door of my cell and came in and had a little box and said, "I have something for you." And he said, "Stand in front of the mirror." And he pulled out a clerical collar and put it around my neck and made me look at myself so I could see myself as a priest. And that was it needed to be that literal for me, to be able to see that. And it was a long road to the priesthood. Lots of difficulties because I was older and divorced, and it wasn't an easy path at all. But eventually I did go to the seminary and continued working while I was going to seminary because I had kids in private schools and needed to make money. And I would get up early in the morning and travel and work and come home and study and classes, and it was a powerful time in my life, deeply meaningful and very, very challenging. But eventually I graduated and was ordained, and that was 18 years ago when I was ordained.
Yeah, because it's interesting, like you said, coming to it later in life and just persevering through, because you have children. And
it took some perseverance, I assure you.
Yeah.
But I never really doubted it along the way either. It was like, this is really what I'm supposed to do. And so it wasn't just, put one foot in front of another and made it through the process.
And because did you first start in Arkansas after?
Yeah, I was ordained in Arkansas.
Bentonville.
That's where I went there to start a church.
Okay.
That was really why I went to Arkansas. The bishop there. I inherited from my grandfather this entrepreneurial spirit, and starting a church requires that. I mean, it helps that you're a little older and having run a business and been independent, because you don't really have much supervision. And Bentonville, Arkansas, was growing, that area, because was and is the headquarters for Walmart. And I found that a very interesting challenge. I'm a pretty liberal fellow, and I saw Walmart as the great Satan, but also struck me as interesting, and because it was growing, and Walmart had required that all of their vendors have offices there, and so every major company in the United States and around the world would have an office there, and it might be 3 or 4 people in the office, or it might be 300 people in the office. I mean, if you're Kraft or Palmolive or something like that, you're going to have hundreds of people there because Walmart's your biggest customer. And so people all over the world had moved there, and it was fascinating. I mean, it was a small town, but there were the first synagogue that had opened up in a rural town in 50 years was there. There was a mosque, 2 Sikh temples, a Hindu temple, and it was changing rapidly, and a very church-going kind of place. But not everybody moved there, went to church, but they kind of expected to, kind of. People, their neighbors would say, "Where are you going to church?" And if they'd moved there from California and hadn't really gone to church, they're like, "Well, the Episcopal Church might work," because we can still be ourselves, and it's not as doctrinal. And so the church did real well. There were a lot of people came, really interesting, creative people, because Walmart they were growing and needed to attract creative, intelligent people, forward-thinking people. So a lot of them would come to our church, and but I clashed with the culture in big ways. Ongoing battle for years with the local sheriff, because I discovered in the county jail that no matter whether you're there overnight or for a year, you never got a hot meal, and it was the only the only jail in the country that I could find that was that way. Really, it was just meant to punish the prisoners. And so I led a battle to make that happen, and with all kinds of tactics involved, with and our new sheriff and legislation and becoming a chaplain and working from the inside and writing letters to the editor. And boy, I had to look over my shoulder everywhere I went to because I was afraid the sheriff was going to. I was felt in danger, actually, because he was so angry with me for trying to, as he says, trying to tell him how to run his jail, and because he felt like it was his, and I thought it was the people's. And I had lots of clashes with Walmart themselves, over wages, but clashes in interesting ways, because I became friends with Alice Walton, and I had yoga with her, and people that were in the human resources part of Walmart who were listening to me to talk about increasing wages, and they made some changes, with regard to environmental changes, and I found it was a bully pulpit, literally, because I'd have people who influence environmental issues and employment issues and around the world that could hear me on Sunday preach. And I preached largely a message of liberation and justice and peace, and I found them somewhat receptive. I mean, they always worked in their own interest, but I had one parishioner who was whose job was to purchase every tennis shoe that Walmart bought from China, and that was billions of dollars, billions and billions. And Joe would go to China, and I never heard this from him. I heard it from people who talked with him, and he'd talk to the owners of the factories and say, "Show me where your people live. What do they? What do you pay them? What's their working conditions like?" And he'd make choices about who he'd do business with in terms of how the employees were treated. And it was very forward thinking, long before the company themselves paid such close attention. But I had people like that in my congregation who could make a difference. It was, it's kind of like I imagine having a church by Capitol Hill, where you're going to have senators and congressmen, listening to you. And it was, in one sense, a really powerful position for a little priest in a little town in Arkansas, because people heard me. So I liked that a lot. And I got to be friends with the rabbi, and we hatched a scheme one day where he needed to build a synagogue and I needed to build a church. And we got to know the leadership in the Muslim community, and they needed to build a mosque. And so we decided we should build one together, all three of us, the three Abrahamic religions, building a single structure that we would share. And we led this effort for a number of years, and the Walton family was very much supporting and providing some matching funds, and we had building designed and many meetings. It's incredible how many meetings you had to have to come to terms with what kind of a building is going to look like and the purposes it would serve, and how to meet all the liturgical requirements of the three different religions, very different, and but we were all friends and tried to work it out, and clashed on things, and it was really quite an amazing experience.
Did it come to fruition in the end?
The rabbi was fired, and not over the Tri-Faith Initiative. It was a money dispute, and without his leadership, it wasn't going to happen. And the chairman of the board didn't have the same vision that he did. And I discovered that, I didn't really know this, that an Episcopal priest is given quite a bit of an authority within the church. And a rabbi at least in a Reformed church, not so much. He's kind of a hired gun, and he lost out, and so it didn't happen. But it was quite a vision. It would have been the first time in the history of the planet
Yes,
that this had happened.
Like remarkable.
Yeah, and so I think big. Don't always succeed. I think big. It seemed an effort worth. I mean, I knew the chances of failure were always there, but it seemed worth the effort.
Mm-hmm. No, I find it's interesting within a smaller town like that. It was growing at that time when you were there, and obviously they put in a Walmart. The family has put in a lot into the community with the art museum there.
Yeah, they're very generous with the community. They're not particularly generous with their money. They're not like the Gates who give away most of their money, but within that community, very generous. Yeah.
But just with you in terms of advocating for things that they should do, and them having kind of a stronghold on the community had to have been like a little bit of a challenge, but you said they were interested.
There was a lot of friction. Yeah. It's a lot of friction, but also we found points of alignment, you know. I mean, like Walmart could see that they needed to pay attention to the environment. And, you know, but they also wanted, the bottom line was going to be the ultimate goal, but if they could be more environmentally sensitive and still have a positive bottom line, they'd want to do that. And there was a big push. Our church is very receptive and open to the LGBTQ community, and Walmart realized they needed to be as well, and we had a lot of close alignment there. One of our parishioners was the global diversity officer for Walmart, and so she was very influential in changing Walmart's policy toward full acceptance of gays and lesbians. And so there's points of alignment there.
That was an easier adjustment compared to more of the economic, financial.
Yeah, right. And finding their support for a multitude of for religion as it's with Muslims, and because there are many Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Sikhs all working for Walmart, so they wanted them to be accepted
included,
and find a home and feel like it's not this hostile little small town in Arkansas that they have to deal with. And that was there, to be sure. I mean, many people were bigots and homophobic people that are just, you know, a backwards mentality. Hillbillies, they're there. It's quite an amazing mixture of people. Very sophisticated people, the richest people on the planet and the poorest people on the planet, side by side. So it was a really fascinating place to be. And when I left, we had 400 members, and when I had arrived, I didn't know a soul. And
how long were you there?
10 years. And
from there, the opportunity come out to Greenport?
Yeah, I had. It was time to go, and that's long enough to stay at one place. And I had friends on the West Coast around Seattle, and knew the bishop there, and thought I might go there. I like it there. But then my daughter, Lillian, she and her husband Elliot lived in Bushwick, in Brooklyn, and she had a baby, and the allure of a granddaughter. I thought, okay, maybe I'll go to the East Coast. And I'd written a book. I'd written a couple of books. My first book was about running the spiritual path. It's about running as meditation. My second book was called Planting a Church in the Shadow of Empire, School of Love, and it was about starting a church in the shadow of Walmart, and I'd finished that book, and so I made some inquiries about coming here, and sent a copy of the book to the canon, who does congregational development and clergy placement and stuff in the Diocese of Long Island, and so I met with him. We hit it off, and I'd sent him my book, and he liked it, and they thought there'd be a role for me out here, and There was a church in Bushwick that I thought that would be nice because it'd be very near where my family was, and that the priest there was about to leave or had just left, and so that's where I wanted to talk to them about going. But the day before I was going to meet with the canon, my daughter said, "Dad, I love you, but this is my neighborhood, and I've lived here 6 or 7 years, and people know me, and I know how you are. You would come in here and you would hang out in the bars and the restaurants, and you'd jump on the bandwagon for whatever social justice issue was happening, and you'd wear your collar everywhere, and before long I'd just be known as the priest's daughter, and go someplace else." And so I was having lunch with the canon and told him that, and he said, "Well, okay, there's lots of places." And I almost wound up in Clinton Hill in a church there, but it turned out I didn't get that job. But I'd met with the Bishop Provenzano, who has a summer home in Orient. And I thought I met with him, and he said, "I think you'll get this job in Clinton Hill, but is there any is there anything about it that you think that you might have a problem with?" And I said, "Well, I'm a real outdoors guy, but I'm interested in living in an urban environment, and what's the big park in Brooklyn? Prospect Park was not far away, and I think there's enough green space there for me to walk my dogs and be out there to satisfy me." And he said, "Well, I think you'll get this job, but if you don't, I've got something else in mind." And so when I didn't, he called me up and told me about these 2 churches on the North Fork. I'm the priest at Holy Trinity here in Greenport, but also the Church of the Redeemer in Mattituck. Mm-hmm. And sounded interesting to me, and I came out in the middle of a nor'easter to meet with the vestries. It was in January, and it was blowing, and the streets were deserted, and it was cold, and the only place open was the Whiskey Wind. And wandered over to the Whiskey Wind and talked to the bartender, and he was a guy who lived in Greenport his whole life, and he kind of filled me in on what it was like on the North Fork and from his perspective, and I kind of loved it. It was powerful. I mean, the way it was just, you could feel the electricity in the air when there's a storm like that. Mm-hmm. And so I decided if I like it now, I think I'd love it in the summer. Mm-hmm. And people talk about how the Holy Spirit blew me into town. Mm-hmm. And it's gone well. There were a few fits and starts with Holy Trinity when I first came. They hadn't had good leadership in a long time. A lot of priests that were retired and just kind of filling in, and there was and it had shrunk. I mean, you'd have 6 or 8 people in a service, and really wasn't much. And they were afraid I was going to close the church, but that was not my intention at all. I'm a church planter, not a church closer, and so I've been here now 7, starting my 8th year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you've been able to turn it around or bring in more people, and obviously we have a lot of people that come to the library that go there, and it seems like a very welcoming and community-based.
It is. It's quite a welcoming church. And we've been successful at really turning it around. Mm-hmm. Part of it is just that a lot of interesting, creative people have moved here, and some of them go to church or are interested in coming to church. They might not have gone to church before, but it's gone well. I really like to break down barriers between the church and the world. And one of the first projects we did was to start our Common Ground Garden I don't know, you've probably seen the signs. It's on the North Road.
Yes.
At Treber Farms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a project of our two churches, and not just our two churches, but the synagogue has plots, and various other private organizations and individuals that are not part of the church have one of the, I think there's 28 different raised beds there right now. And we raise vegetables and give them away. And we started that the year after I came, and started off just a big pile of dirt. It's been quite successful. A lot of people involved, and if you're listening and you'd like to be involved in Common Ground Garden, reach out to me. It's a great way to get your hands in the dirt and meet some nice people and do some good work. And your work, a lot of people enjoy it. I do too.
Are there any other programs? I know you have the Rainer Gross mentioned the art project.
Oh, did you interview Reiner?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so, but yeah, just curious if you have other programs or events that you do within the community or at the church.
Oh, so many things.
Too many to...
So many. The one that Reiner's mentioned, this is really kind of a lovely story. We, pre-COVID, we did a remodeling of the church, and in this one section that we call the salon, we built it so that we could easily hang pictures, artwork. And the first project we did was this marine art camp for kids, a summer program where they come learn about art and cooking and crafts of various kinds and marine life. And we hung their art up from the camp inside the salon. Well, then COVID hit, and their art just stayed. It's just kids' art for 2.5 years, maybe 3. And then a curator appeared, Franklin, and he was the curator at the Nassau County Art Museum. Had been for many years, and he and his wife started attending. And I said, Franklin, we have an art gallery. Would you like to be our curator? And he said, yes. And Franklin knows every prominent artist on the East End, and he's a fine artist himself. So we reached out to a couple artists, and we did our first show, and I think we've done 6 so far, something like that. And we have an opening reception usually on a Sunday afternoon, and wine and cheese kind of thing, and a bunch of people come, and then they leave their art in the salon for about 6 weeks. And so people can come in and see it at other times. And it makes our church much more beautiful, too, and interesting, because we have some fantastic artists here on the East End. And it's an ongoing thing. And there's a constant stream of people coming through. We have a number of yoga classes and Tai Chi and Qigong, and a theater group meets there and practices and performs. A couple of different AA meetings, and all kinds of things, really. And it's symbolized by our Garth project. A Garth is an English term for this little close or a little garden area that's typically outside churches, where you can kind of come in and wander around and have conversations and pray and meditate. And so we transformed our garden outside the church, put in a fountain and beautiful plants, and it's a very welcoming kind of place. It's a gift to the community. It's not just for our church; it's for everybody to use. We use it for coffee hour and Sunday morning, but we want people to come by all the time and just kind of be there, because it's a nice place to be. But it's also kind of a threshold into the church. And when I use the term church, it's sort of church writ large. Church isn't just what we do on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. Church is all the other pathways to the God through beauty and through martial arts, or through movement of various kinds, and through theater and music. And We have all kinds of concerts that are happening. I don't know if I brought a calendar, I'd say which the next one is, but go to our website, you'll find out what we have going on. But it's really people that pass through kind of get it. They'll go into the parish hall, maybe for a yoga class, and look around and say, the energy here is really good. And I point out to them that people have been praying in there for 150 years, and the prayers have kind of seeped into the walls, and you get it. And so it's really a lovely, sacred space to do all kinds of things that's transformative, I think, for the people that use it. Even for the Boy Scouts, in the basement. I think they kind of get it too. And they're all in my backyard playing with the dogs and playing Frisbee and bringing some energy to the place. And so it's growing, thriving in a time when most churches are shrinking. And I think the key really is to recognize pathways to the divine. There are many, and what we do on Sunday morning as a church might appeal to me and to those who come, but I think the vast majority of people are looking for some way of expressing their spirituality, some pathway. And
it might come in a different form.
All kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And so we want to be open to that. And my sense of where church is going to be is that the churches that survive will be spiritual centers, not just churches who do what they do, continue to do that for the people for whom that's the faithful around that particular pathway, but offering other avenues to the divine. And that's all church for me. What happens in those grounds 24 hours a day feels like church. So that's where I see us going, and I think that's why we thrived, actually. We have a new program that's just barely getting off the ground, called the Way Station. And that's the result of our observation that oftentimes when people are leaving the Quanticut program or one of the rehab programs in Eastern Long Island Hospital, they're very much at loose ends. And they don't know, sometimes they're literally lost. Like, we don't know where they are. They went in there 28 days earlier and they came out sober, but they're confused. And how did I get here? And they need help. They need some guidance of some sort. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people walk up Manor Place, arrive on Main Street, and they're like, okay, I'm on the corner here. Am I going to go down to George's at the service station and get a beer? Or am I going to go left and, go get on the bus and go home? And they go one way or the other. I've had many conversations with them. I usually got some clothes in a plastic bag. And we want to do something to help those folks. And it's a little spotty with the hospital. I can't tell. Haven't had a lot of cooperation yet, but sometimes they're just released at loose ends because they release themselves. They leave the program voluntarily without completing it, and they're then ordered off the hospital grounds, and they're really lost and confused and don't have anybody to pick them up or anything. So we have a program we've launched where we're putting together these kits, like a canvas bag that you can put across your body that will contain some money and some food and some maps and maybe a bus pass or a train pass and some guidance and a conversation along the way and a throwaway phone, and just so that they know when they're leaving there, they've got their first place to go is somebody wants to help them, and it's very much an experimental thing. We're just getting it off the ground, and we're learning as we go along to see what the needs are. And we have a generous benefactors help fund this, and some volunteers who want to be involved in meeting the need. And there's a lot of ways to do good in the world, and I respect the idea that buying mosquito nets for people in malaria-ridden places, that's really useful. But I'm right here in Greenport, right on the corner of Manor Place, around the corner from the hospital, and I see people walking by every day in need, and in particular needs, and all of us know somebody, if not ourselves, who have problems with substance abuse, and doing good there makes a lot of sense to me, where we are, and to address the need that's right in front of us. And I don't know how it's going to work out. It's kind of a bold experiment, and we'll see what happens. But it's exciting, and we're always looking for different programs to be involved in, ways to be of service to the wider community, and I think we're well placed to do that.
It sounds like a wonderful program to do within the community, and like you said, you can offer things worldwide, but obviously we do have things within the community that we can work on in improving, and I think that's obviously you probably will have trials and see how things might have to adjust some things, but it seems like a great program to implement.
It'll be interesting. I already have. I mean, it's like there was this couple, they were at odds with each other, and so just trying to help them and get them pointed in one direction when they were really at loggerheads with each other was like, okay, this is pretty challenging. I don't know if I want little old ladies from the church doing this, because I'm a little scared right now. I don't know, who's going to pull out what. So there will be challenges, to be sure, because you got people who are troubled, and they've just, they've been through some trying times, and so they're often going to act out in one way or another. And then I've had lovely, lovely people too that have just been so grateful just to have somebody who actually cares and give them a place to rest and figure out what they're going to do. And offer them some direction and a ride, and
yes,
appreciative of the smallest things. So I think it'll be the gamut of all experiences.
And I had a question over your career, or within your journey through priesthood, and what have you enjoyed most about your life as a priest?
Let's see. Well, the liturgical things are really nice. I mean, like baptizing babies. Oh my gosh. Or baptizing anyone. I love to do that, particularly to hold a baby in my arms and give them their name and an identity as a child of God, with surrounded by the community that loves them, and we even do baptisms now in our fountain outside, which is just glorious, and I love that so much. In general, it's what's, I think, the most appealing thing about being a priest is to be with people at important times in their lives, at these transition points, whether it be crisis of some sort, going through financial difficulties or divorce, or finding out about an illness, or being with the families when their loved one's dying, marriages. They're pretty fun, as long as you don't get a bridezilla. But it's really just being with people when in times that are important, and you get to have important conversations. I mean, I can carry on a cocktail party conversation and enjoy it, but talking about people about matters of substance is the most fun. Really, it's what I'm not wasting my time, and it feels good, you know. And I don't pretend to have any answers. I mostly listen, and but just being with people in times of crisis and lovely times too, you know, just the times of transition. Helping people mark times is important, and I love that. Yeah.
And I had two other questions, more just about the North Fork as a whole. And you've been here for about 8 years.
Yeah.
What have you enjoyed about living and working on the North Fork?
Well, we're surrounded by water.
It's a start.
And I love the water, and I'm a sailor, and have a boat around the corner, and I went sailing yesterday, and I love that.
Do you do that? Is that something more that you do alone?
No, it's a big boat.
It's okay.
I can't handle it by myself very well. I keep thinking I might be able to, but docking is tricky, and I need somebody to get off and tie the boat off before I run into something. So my wife usually goes with me, or I went with a friend yesterday, and I'm planning a sabbatical this fall. In November, I'm going to sail the boat to the Bahamas, and after hurricane season, and leave it there, and be home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then fly back down January, February, and March, and sail from island to island, and occasionally fill in at some Anglican churches on the islands. The priests there are very overworked and often have churches in one island or another, and I love the idea of saying, hey, I'll fill in for you Sunday. You need a break? Go take off, and I'll, you know.
Would that be the longest journey you've done?
Oh yeah. The most I've done is to Martha's Vineyard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be a nice. Well, that'd be an experience.
It'd be an adventure. Yeah, I'd be too sure. Yeah, but I have a friend who's a ship's captain and has done blue water sailing a number of times, and he's gonna go with me. And another friend who's a competent sailor, so the three of us take it down. So I love the water, but also there's this concept of thin places. That's a Celtic kind of concept where the sacred and the secular sort of blend together, and you don't really. It's where there's this thin membrane between where we are now and this mystical world. And the North Fork is literally a thin place. You know, you've got the Sound on one side, the Conic Bay on the other. It's just a little sliver of land. And I find it mystical. And other people do too. Sometimes people living here for a long time have kind of, when you live at a place a long time, you can get jaded. You don't notice it anymore. But I think this is a place where what's holy and sacred is not far from us. It's a mystical place, and I love it for that reason alone. It's real easy to find yourself it's not so crowded, and you can find yourself on the beach by yourself, and in the woods in various places, and you get a real sense of the presence of the divine here that you don't every place. I deeply appreciate that.
Yeah. And then I also like to ask, in terms of the future, what do you hope for the future of the North Fork and its community down the road?
Yeah. Well, a lot of things are happening right now. I mean, with the opening of the Performing Arts Center, that's fantastic. That's brought new life alone to this community, and you can see it changing. I mean, it changed rapidly in COVID, where a lot of people, new people that moved here, or people who had homes here decided to make it a permanent home. And there's this real influx of artists and scientists and creative people of all kinds. And I think it's going to be eventually very much an artistic place to be, and performing arts kind of place. I'd like to see more music. We have a lot of good music now, but I lived most of my life in Austin, where that is a music scene. I mean, it's the live music capital of the world. And on a Wednesday night in Austin, there's 300 places to go have live music. And we have a little smatterings of music. And we're doing what we can at our church to bring in the musical events of one kind or another. But I'd like to see that happen in the wider community, and I think it's going to. I didn't live here 20 years ago, and I know that people, longtime residents, sometimes, talk about how it used to be, but I think that happens everywhere. There are issues, to be sure. I mean, affordable housing is a big one here. That needs, if we're gonna stay who we are, and not turn into the Hamptons. We've got to have places for people of all incomes to live. And so that's a really important effort that the village is addressing, but it's going to take
it's a challenge.
It's a real challenge. Yeah. We want, it's really great to have all these people moving here that bring their own skills and identities and impulses, and it makes it a beautiful place. But we all got to live here.
Yeah. And is there anything else you'd like to discuss or say that we haven't talked about?
Well, I would urge anyone to take part in all the different activities that we have. You can go to our website or reach out to me. And I'll be quite happy to. Oftentimes we have a chalkboard out in front of the garth that acquaints people with whatever's going on. It's not out there right now because it rained earlier in the week and it all got washed away. It's the nature of a chalkboard. But come, whether you're interested in music or theater or art or yoga, or might find yourself drawn to come to church at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, I think you'll find yourself welcome, or whatever pathway to the divine that appeals to you.
So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in today and telling your story, and really it's wonderful all the work you're doing in the community. So I want to thank you so much for coming on today.
It's a great pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 67 with Reverend Roger Joslin. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.